Today I want to talk to you guys about some of the base principles for winter farming. And so I've been talking a lot about season extension recently because we are going into winter, so I think it's a relevant subject and you guys seem to be liking it. So let's get into it. First thing that I think is the most important thing to understand when you are looking to farm over the winter is, if you haven't done it before, go in baby steps. So the first thing you want to do, especially if you're on a smaller farm on a tight budget, the first thing you want to get into is look into really pushing your season all the way on the edges. So that means pushing your fall season as far as you can go, and then getting your spring season started as early as possible. That's the first thing. So that could be using some poly low tunnels, and so I talked about that in some recent videos. Getting some poly low tunnels going with a combination of overwintered crops and really late crops. So I've talked about overwintered crops in the past, so things like kale, spinach, carrots, even lettuce, they can be overwintered, and you can have those start really early for you in the spring. And so how you do that is by starting something like, let's say, carrots, for example. If you haven't seen my winter carrots video, check that out here and get more about it. But the basic idea is that you start carrots at the last planting date possible. So for myself and my climate, that's about the first and second week of August. If I start carrots then, they have enough time to mature before it gets cool that they can sit in the ground all winter long, and I can harvest them even in the snow, as long as they're covered with a poly low tunnel. So doing that with kale is a similar idea, though you might want to start your kale in July, get it in the ground as transplants by August, and then you should have some nice mature kale to get into the winter. You can do it with spinach as well. You can start spinach. So if you want to do an overwintered spinach, meaning that you want to have that crop available for as early as March, and again, all of this depends on the climate you're in. I'm assuming that most of us watching are in a North American climate and you have a winter. If you don't have a winter, none of this is relevant to you. But if you do, so something like spinach, you can start it, you can direct seed it in the ground October 1st, first week of October, even up to the third week of October, depending on how cool you get in the fall. And then that spinach will grow just a little bit. You keep it covered all winter, and by March, or even as early as late to mid-February, it'll be mature and ready to harvest. So that's how I started. So lettuce, you can do a similar thing. And so if you get really cold, like if you live in Southern Ontario or Quebec or anywhere in the prairies north of the Canadian border or around that area, you're going to get really cold winters. So this stuff might not work so much for poly low tunnels. It might for greenhouses though. I haven't lived in those areas, so I can't say for sure. But so that's the basic thing, is push your season as far as you can first. So with just like with poly low tunnels, what we're really talking about is really simple season extension stuff. So we talked about caterpillar tunnels a couple days ago, basic greenhouses. These are the best places to start to get your feet wet with the whole idea. And with these simple greenhouses like this, I'm talking about unheated greenhouses, caterpillar tunnels, poly low tunnels, the basic idea is keeping the winter precipitation off. So primarily that's in the fall. Like right now, it's been raining solid for almost 2 days. We've barely been able to get any work done today. But what's happened right now is most of our crops that we're going to keep in the field that we want to push in the winter, they've got poly low tunnels on them, and they're keeping most of the rain off. This is really important because once you get into below freezing weather, the ground's going to freeze, especially if it's consistently below freezing. Your ground is going to freeze, but the ground that isn't very wet won't freeze as quickly, and it might not even freeze at all, again, depending on how cold you get. So this is a really important thing to understand, is you need to keep the ground dry, and I don't mean bone dry enough that you're not going to have a freeze. And so some people were asking me in the last couple of videos, you know, how do you water in the winter? Well, you don't really have to water in the winter. Once your crops are set and established in the late summer or early fall, you've obviously watered them to get them established. Once you go into winter, these crops, except maybe the overwintered ones like spinach and kale that are going to be harvested in the spring, Crops that are mature that you're going to keep in the ground going into winter, they're already established. They're going to have a root base that goes down a few inches. They're going to be absorbing water, and when temperatures drop, like if you're anywhere around freezing, above freezing, you don't need to water. I mean, you might in the winter, if you get a sunny day in your greenhouse and it's warm, you might consider watering then if you think you need it. But generally speaking, in cool temperatures, you don't need to water. When we have production in the winter time, and this is again depends on where you are. If you're really far south, then none of this really matters to you. But for those of us in the cool climates, you can't really direct seed things in the ground too close to the winter solstice. Your day lengths are going to be too short. You don't have enough heat units. So again, just to reiterate what we talked about with establishing crops going into the winter, is that they need to do most of their growing before it gets cold. So around about a month before your winter solstice, whatever is in the ground to harvest is all you have. That's all you have, right? So this is actually what makes winter farming kind of simple in a way, is that I found to get the same amount of production that I would on my farm in the summertime, if I wanted to get that same amount of production in the winter, I would need to have at least 4 times the amount of land. The reason for this is that in the winter things don't grow, right? This is why it's important to establish your crops before it gets cold, and then they sit there dormant. So again, the spinach, some lettuces, kale, red Russian kale, tatsoi, some of those cool weather greens, if they're mature, they sit in the ground, they're alive, but they won't grow. So the challenge with winter farming is that you won't have the amount of production that you can get in the summer because you won't get the regrowth. So once you cut a bed of spinach, it's going to take months for that to regrow. Again, depending on your climate, it's hard to say how it's going to be for everybody. Well, it's near impossible for me to tell you. But my basic approach is when I'm thinking about crops that I want in the ground. So just next door here, I'm still working on this greenhouse, but it's all planted with lettuce. And I have 2 other greenhouses with lettuce. I want to think about how much lettuce I want to sell per week, and then I might bring that down to a bed unit. Let's just say, for the sake of the discussion, I want to have 50 feet of lettuce bed to harvest every week for a certain period of time. Then that makes it easy for me to plan, because basically what I do for planning is I just don't even think about regrowth. I just immediately discount that, and I go, okay, if I want to have, say, 12 weeks of lettuce to get me through into my overwintered stuff. So let's talk about 6 weeks on either end of the winter solstice. So that being December 21st, 3 weeks before, 3 weeks after. That's the coldest part of our winter. I want to make sure I've got enough lettuce to get through that period. So that means I'm going to harvest 1 bed each. So I want to have essentially 12 beds of lettuce to get me through that. And you will get regrowth on them at some point, but it's hard to predict because winters can vary so much, and it depends on your climate, of course. So, but this is the way I do it, is I just think if I was going to get a one-off harvest of each bed, how much product would I want to harvest each week? That's how I plan it. Whereas in the summer, it's more complicated, but in a way it's easier because you know you're going to get regrowth. You know, you're going to cut that lettuce, and then 10 days later, it's going to come back, or whatever the cut and come again crop is. So those are some of the basics as far as planning goes. Last and not least is subsidize your field winter production with indoor production. So I've done a variety of videos on microgreens. You guys just search microgreens on my channel. There's lots of videos out there. I'll continue to make more in the winter. But a way to do it is subsidize your field production with stuff in a heated greenhouse. So I used to do this in my kitchen with an indoor lighting rig. I was able to produce up to 20 or more flats of microgreens a week. That's a good amount of production in a very small amount of space. The nice thing about pairing it up with being in your house is that you're already heating your house. So you're not going to have to go and pay for heating something like this or heating a less efficient greenhouse, which can be pretty costly. You can just do it where you're already heating. So some people put it in their garage, some people have a room they can do it in their house. Obviously you're going to need to control your airflow, your humidity, and make sure your temperatures are solid, but that wouldn't be an issue if it was in your house. And so, you know, if you're gonna do it in your house, you need to think about how that humidity might affect your house. So you have to be careful there. But the basic idea is it's incredible how much production you can actually do with a little bit of microgreens and then a little bit of crops in the field. So just to kind of take you through how I got into winter farming is I started with where I started in this conversation, was talking about I would push my season really far. So poly low tunnels was the first thing I started doing, and also crop customization. So growing the things that can grow or at least survive in the cold weather. So all those crops I mentioned at the beginning: spinach, kale, carrots, some lettuces. And then I would start, so in that first year doing it, I had just those crops in the field, and then by the dead of winter, which is that 6 weeks on the shoulders of the winter solstice, I had nothing coming off the field. But then I had production of microgreens. So I'd have pea shoots, sunflower shoots, and radish shoots, and I was going to a farmer's market with just those things. I would even make a mix with the 3 of them, like I'd put 3 of them together and just call it a micro mix. So you can get 4 products out of 3 microgreens that way. You can even get creative and try other things as well. So that's how I got started. And then the next year, I'd built a couple greenhouses. In fact, they were those caterpillar tunnels that I've shown you in the last couple videos. Started in those and planted really late lettuce and spinach in them. So by, like, not really late, but late for the season, I would plant by about mid-September into late September. And then those greens would be mature by the winter. So if you get a slightly mild winter, you can be harvesting lettuce and spinach, even kale, all winter long in there. And then you pair that up with having overwintered crops in the field that are gonna sit for a really early start. And so that's what I did, is with these greenhouses, I was able to push my winter all the way through, of course subsidizing with microgreens, and then having that early stuff in the field under poly low tunnels. So that's basically how I got started. But the thing that's the most important, I just want to reiterate, the thing that's most important about understanding all of this is that if you're in a cold climate, things don't really grow during the dead of winter. The most important thing to understand is you need to get your crops mature before that really cool time comes, and you'll have to figure that out for yourself. Like for myself here, by about early November, nothing in the field is growing. If it is, it wouldn't even be noticeable. You wouldn't notice growth for 2 months. Like it would be very, very slow. So you really have to think about your farm as this static entity, that it's not dynamic like it is in the summer where things are consistently growing. It's totally static. And think about what you want to have out in the field and how much of that you're going to harvest each week. I'm trying to just give you more ideas of how you can push your season. I'd love to see more farmers pushing their season over the winter. It's a great time to farm because it's not that much work. It's all about establishing it, and you don't have to do the weeding. You're not doing bed prep. You're not turning beds over. It's just a lot of setting things up and just harvesting. And so harvesting can be a hassle when you're doing poly low tunnels in the snow. You're moving around snow and you're getting a bit wet. But other than that, it's pretty easy because you don't really have to worry about watering. You don't have to worry about irrigation. It's all pretty simple. I hope you guys have found that helpful. If you want to see more stuff like this, hit the subscribe button right now if you haven't already. And if you are a subscriber or you just want to search more of my videos, use the search feature on where you just list all my videos. Use the search feature and put in things like microgreens or winter or just simple keywords. And I've done a lot of videos already, and I've done a lot of videos on some subjects. Like I've done a few on winter farming and winter crops. I've done a number of them on microgreens. So use that search feature and find more of my content, because I'm starting to see a lot of comments where people are asking, have you done a video on this? And it's like, yeah, I have. Just use the search and you'll find them. So hope that helps you guys. We'll see you soon.